In 2025, I played over 150 video games. Big releases, tiny indies, old favourites, unreleased demos, arcade-only curios, even daily ritual games. I didn't set out to play a new game every 2.5 days, and somehow I wasn't spending more money than I did in 2024. It's a surprise, especially considering I had swapped to an Apple Mac earlier in the year, a platform that's not exactly known for being great at games. But I think that was kind of the point. I wanted to rethink what a normal gaming setup looks like and lean harder into the small games coverage I'd been enjoying the year before. Instead of living on the big headliners, I kept picking up shorter and more experimental stuff for both the Mac and Steam Deck, and that adds up fast, even before factoring in the Switch 2 and its launch titles. All of that's also worth keeping in mind alongside the fact that I missed or deliberately skipped some of the year's biggest releases: Claire Obscure, Expedition 33, Battlefield 6, Death Stranding 2, Assassin's Creed Shadows, Doom the Dark Ages, Ghost of Yotei, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, and Baby Steps. Even without having played the high scorers, I still feel as if I had a robust gaming diet, chewing through some all-timer puzzle platformers, excellent narrative adventure games, goofy sports simulators, and more than a few trend chasers along the way. Figuring out how to narrow down all that to a single best took a while, and a few false starts, but I think I've finally landed on something that feels just right. 2025 felt like a year where the channel came into clearer focus without losing the space to experiment, and this video, being one of the rare times I'm talking to you directly like this, is part of that. I honestly wasn't sure how best to present this. At one point, I actually ranked every single game on camera, with a little explanation for each. That came out to just over 6 hours unedited. If listening to that entire process sounds appealing to you, well, there's a Patreon-shaped solution to that. Instead, I wanted to strip things back. Less polish, fewer clever theses, and a more direct look at what actually won me over this past year. And while I'm pulling back the curtain, I'll also be doing a little Q&A to give a better sense of what Hot Cider looked like in 2025, and where things might be heading next. So here's the breakdown. I'll be handing out 20 awards, 10 for new releases and 10 for first-time plays. Daily ritual games and replays are sitting this one out, since this year was really about discovery, for me and hopefully you as well. I'll also be talking through some of the bigger trends from the year and answering a few of your questions along the way. Welcome to the most laid-back award show in games, as we crown 2025's hottest ciders. From @Belarius at BSky Social, what has been your gaming white whale in 2025, i.e. something you were hyped about but never quite got around to playing? And from @Games and Culture, I'm increasingly concerned about the unrelenting churn of new stuff. Which 2025 video games do you imagine you'll revisit in subsequent years? So I'm going to combine those two questions as I think they fit quite nicely together. In terms of 2025's gaming white whale, I was quite consistent in seeking out the stuff that interested me, but there were definitely a few games that I just couldn't make the time for. Blueprints I did give its dues, though not to the extent it deserved, but the Seance of Blake Manor is probably the biggest one I missed. So many games writers I respect were raving about it. I don't actually know much beyond the basics, a period adventure set in Ireland with heavy use of traditional language, which really sounds extremely my thing, so I'm curious to see what I missed out on. I also spent most of the year putting off 24 Killers, Stray Children, and Off. I've got a bit of an RPG blind spot, and I'm hoping to finally carve out time this year to fix that. As for what I'll go back to after 2025, I was surprised by how few games felt like long-term commitments. Most of the roguelikes I played were one-and-done experiences. I did a handful of runs, got a win or two, and felt genuinely satisfied long before unlocking everything. That might sound wasteful, but I actually appreciate games that feel complete without demanding endless repetition. The one game I can really see myself revisiting, outside of Nintendo games with upcoming DLC, is Skin Deep. In the same way I return to Dishonored or Prey, the short levels and flexible approaches make it easy to dip back into. And I guess now that it's on PC, I can also see myself revisiting Device 6 through the Simogo collection every so often, if only for a quick hit of inspiration.
I'm gonna reroute to avoid churches and law offices. I just don't need that kind of drama today.
I didn't realise how much I missed Telltale-style games until I played Dispatch, Ad Hoc's 8-episode-long superhero workplace comedy. Part of it is just how good it felt to have an episodic game everyone was playing at the same time again. Like a good TV show, each new release sparked conversation, comparing choices, arguing about characters, and speculating on where things were going. It works because the fundamentals are strong, the story offers meaningful choices, the characters are well written, the voice acting is excellent, bringing to life a slightly more adult take on capes. Think Invincible without the ultra-violence, where messy relationships and interpersonal drama take center stage, and the animation is far better than you'd expect from something so clearly Telltale adjacent. But what surprised me more was how refreshing it felt to play an adventure game that doesn't try to be a watered-down RPG. It's happy to just be a playable story, focused on shaping how events unfold, something Telltale did well, and their successors at Ad Hoc clearly understand. That's reinforced by its central dispatch mechanic. You assign characters to jobs based on context clues, comparing their skills to the task using radar charts, and if those things don't line up, the game flicks an air hockey puck into the overlap and lets chance decide. It's a tactile spin on the usual RPG dice roll, and a genuinely fun one at that. Basically, I just want more dispatch. Enough that, even though I'm not really a Critical Role fan, I'll be checking out their next game when it launches. The team's won me over, and I hope this opens the door to more games like it. I can pair up the next two awards because they're from the same developer and publisher and clearly build on the same ideas. Granted, I may have just nuked my indie credibility by giving two awards to Electronic Arts. But what Hazelight Studios does so well is combine AAA production values with the kind of playful, mechanical experimentation you only really see in indie games. It's the sort of thing Valve or older-era Naughty Dog were great at, and it's becoming increasingly rare in the space. It also helps that, despite being tied to EA's ecosystem, these games run brilliantly on Steam Deck. They're co-op games that actually feel cooperative, right down to accommodating different setups. That contrast mattered even more in 2025, a year dominated by so-called friend slop, VoIP-powered multiplayer frustration games. I played a fair few of them. Peak, Are We There Yet, the headliners, and most ranked pretty near the bottom of my list, which only made me appreciate Hazelight's approach even more. For context, I had a semi-consistent control group across all 5 games. I played them with YouTube's to Snakerer, and even as someone genuinely skeptical of glossy AAA releases, he still had a pretty good time with EA's offerings. Both are big crowd pleasers then. A Way Out, as the early experiment, has a bit more friction that makes it stick in the memory. Split Fiction is incredibly polished, sometimes so smooth that it sands that texture down, but that's hardly a bad problem to have. If anything, Split Fiction stands out for just how often it introduces new co-op ideas. Every 10 minutes or so, there's a new mechanic and a new way to coordinate. It feels less like a single game and more like a tasting menu for co-op design. If one section doesn't land, another is right around the corner. That's the kind of AAA innovation I love to see, using budget not to inflate one idea, but to fund lots of smaller ones. Very Super Mario Odyssey, in a way. The story and presentation of Split Fiction didn't stick with me as much, which wasn't too big a problem. A Way Out handled that side better, and Brothers, A Tale of Two Sons still clears both. Still, like Christopher Nolan arguing for scale because he's one of the few trusted with it, I can't help but respect what Hazelight is doing. They're handed a huge blank check, and instead of playing it safe, they use it to push co-op forward in fantastic ways. I just wish some smaller developers could take a few of those great one-off ideas and really polish them up into something more fulfilling. It'd certainly be more appreciated than everyone chasing the same trends. You know, I should probably explain my thoughts on Peak a little bit better. One sec. From @JetSetKyoro at bsky.social, do you feel like certain kinds of indie games have grown so popular that they've infected a lot of developers and created bad trends for indie games going forward? I don't think there's any truly bad trends in indie games right now, though it has been funny watching Vampire Survivors and Balatro influences spread absolutely everywhere. There are trends I don't personally enjoy, but that's less about the trend itself and more about the kinds of games it produces, Friendslot being the clearest example. I'm pretty relaxed about the Balatro and Survivorsification of things because I actually like those mechanics, and most of the games I played using them were still genuinely good. Friendslop is the same even if I don't love the games I've played. There's plenty of filler out there where those familiar systems prop up weaker ideas, but that's just how trends work. A few people do something interesting, a lot follow awkwardly, and eventually the first game to break away becomes the breath of fresh air everyone notices. Fortunately, players are pretty good at filtering out the junk. If there's a takeaway here, it's not to panic over trends, but to be deliberate with where you spend your money. Support the developers doing thoughtful work, and try to avoid the grift wherever possible. I haven't covered horror on this channel yet. I have talked about the Resident Evil games, but mostly through their adventure game DNA. Not that anyone's demanded it, there's enough horror YouTubers out there doing it better than me. Quick shoutouts to Pim's Crypt and Sputnik34, and I think part of why I don't talk about horror much is the same reason I avoid music or film theory. I don't really see myself as an expert. Not that I'm much of an expert in anything here, but still. But it's a genre I've always loved in both games and film, largely because of how transgressive it can be. Horror taps into very primal fears, often by playing with imagined threats rather than literal ones. At the same time, most people don't actually enjoy being scared, which is why horror rarely attracts huge budgets. And it's in that overlap of high ambition to limited resources that horror becomes interesting. How do you create fear without money to throw at it? The answer has driven some of the most creative works, from striking visual styles and inventive sound design to mechanics built entirely around tension and unease. Something perfectly illustrated by Wrong Organ's mouthwashing. I picked it up in a humble bundle alongside Who's Lila, Buckshot Roulette and Arctic Eggs. All of them sit right on the cutting edge of modern low-fidelity horror, taking the uncanny look of older 3D software and turning it into a fully realised aesthetic, from Who's Lila's uncanny photocopied faces to Mouthwashing's distorted and data-moshed visuals. What really worked for me with Mouthwashing is that it isn't about jump scares or monsters. It's slower and more methodical, a kind of real-time ghost story where the horror comes from getting inside the characters' heads, using a first-person perspective and clever visual tricks to externalize their mental state. I won't talk about the plot because the game is the story, so all I'll say is that it caught me off guard, and the less you know going in, the better. In a funny way, it reminded me of 2024's Thank Goodness You're Here. It's short, self-contained, and stuck with me long after I finished it. And as far as indie horror goes, it's exactly the kind I'd love to see more of, which, thankfully, feels like an area that's doing pretty well right now. From @FreshPineapple, you seem to have a great knowledge of named aesthetics, auditory movements and styles. What first got you into learning about these, and how did you develop said knowledge? Many thanks. Well, first, thank you for the kind comment. When it comes to building my knowledge base, it mostly comes down to curiosity, spotting things in games that interest me, then asking questions and following them wherever they may lead. Google and Wikipedia are usually the starting point, and then I work outwards through the sources they reference. Learning how to ask good questions takes time, but some of the most rewarding insights come from accidental discoveries. Unexpected connections you only find by digging around. For example, I didn't know what a radar graph was until asking what the charts and dispatch were referencing. I say if you're interested in named aesthetics, the Consumer Aesthetics Research Institute is a great resource for cataloguing digital art movements. For music theory, I'd recommend starting with reviews and essays about music you already like, paying attention to the technical details people highlight and why they matter. But more broadly, widen your cultural diet. Go to art galleries, listen to new music, read criticism, art recommendations in the right places, and follow whatever sparks your curiosity. I'm grouping these three together since I've already covered them earlier in the year, across the June and October Next Fests and in a dedicated video. I should probably explain how Aperius DX went from my Game of the Year to 8th place. What I really appreciate about these games is how neatly they fit into my year. I can spend a good chunk of time with each, unlock plenty, feel satisfied, and then move on without feeling like they were demanding my attention. They feel like a modern take on an old arcade mindset, games you dig into for a while and then leave having seen most of what they have to offer. That's especially refreshing in an era of endless content funnels like Fortnite and Roblox. I'm increasingly drawn to games that do one thing well and know when to stop. And while I don't know if these will be all-time replays, they were definite highlights of 2025. I found them every bit as rewarding as the year's big prestige releases. And really, the thing that separates them from the most talked about releases isn't a gap in quality, but sheer production and marketing budgets. Aperius DX, Absalom and Ball Pit also complement each other nicely. A modern tunnel shooter, a Hades-inspired beat-em-up, and a ball breaker with deep progression respectively. All riff on familiar improvement loops, but each scratches a different itch, and each looks great in its own style, from club-inspired vectors to hand-drawn animation and CRT-soaked pixel art. Ball Pit just edges out the other two, thanks to just how much more there is beyond its initial demo. New characters completely change how the game plays, new zones keep throwing in fun obstacles, the progression keeps escalating in really satisfying ways. You could pick up all three for the price of a single AAA release, and have several genuinely great evenings lined up. That's what makes them special. Instead of one bloated game trying to be everything for everyone, each one focuses on being the best in its lane, and together they make for a far richer gaming diet. The same applies to Pepper Grinder, which earned its own spot in this year's Cool Games compilation. If you're looking for a standout platformer to round out its motley crew, this one comes highly recommended. Despite its pixel art look, it feels refreshingly modern, closer in spirit to Ubisoft's Rayman reboots, thanks to its super smooth analog movement. You carve clean lines through dirt like a rocket, blast across chasms, and even turn enemies into temporary platforms. The drill mechanic even opens up a surprising amount of variety, from charged special weapons to clever movement tricks. It's clearly built for speed, with hidden trinkets and secret areas that reward replay and backtracking. And like a good mixtape, it's happy to bring back its best ideas instead of constantly chasing something new. If there's one downside, it's that it ends just as you're really hitting your stride. A fantastic showing overall, and one that firmly put the developers on my radar. I'm very curious to see what they do next. From @AshleyHunt517, why do you feel like people are turning away from AAA games and embracing indie games more? Money. But more seriously, I do think discoverability improves year on year. Players are finding smaller games far more easily now, thanks to platforms like Steam, Itch, Humble, and GOG. That's not just anecdotal either. Events like the Game Awards now spotlight titles like Balatro, Silksong, or Hades 2. Big names to some of us, but still new discoveries for a lot of players. Lower prices, strong reviews, better storefronts, and more platforms all help. There are simply more ways to play more games, and that's before you even widen the definition to include daily rituals or the huge, unconventional audiences on places like itch.io. What's more interesting to me is where a new gap is forming. At the top end, players have clustered around games designed to last forever. Fortnite, Roblox, GTA Online, Warzone. That makes it incredibly hard for new AAA releases to break through. Single-player blockbusters still exist, but they're no longer the centre of gravity. At the same time, there's a massive appetite for smaller, bite-sized games people can dip into between those forever games, which is great, even if the sheer amount of games is becoming a problem. I played over 150 last year, but almost 203 games came out in the first few weeks of January this year. It leaves the middle squeezed, and that middle can be surprisingly slight. Games made by small teams over a few years, trying to survive between two extremes. That's why I'm curious about things like Steam Machine style hardware, not as products but as catalysts. The Steam Deck's already lowered the barrier to PC gaming in a big way. If we see more console-like entry points, that could quietly change who games as a whole are for, and how people discover smaller titles in the first place. This was a first time play off the back of another release I'll talk about later, but I really want to stress just how good Elec Head is. You play as a robot with an electric head that can be detached and fired like a projectile. In this metallic world, electrified surfaces power both helpful and harmful devices, and the challenge is finding a way forward with a deliberately limited toolkit. It's pretty much my ideal puzzle platformer, a single core mechanic expanded into all kinds of brain-teasing directions. Tutorials are woven invisibly into the design. No text boxes, no voiceovers, just learning through play, gradually revealing just how much depth there is beneath an initially simple rule set. Every puzzle has a solution, but they're pitched just right. Challenging enough that when you crack one, you genuinely feel clever for doing so. All of this wraps in a striking 1-bit colour style, with excellent sprite work and sound design. I'll admit I'm a bit of a mark for this kind of thing, but I love games that strip themselves down to the bare essentials and impress purely through smart design. Elec Head does that beautifully, and its immediate follow-up somehow does that even better. Going from a stripped-back, ultra-modern indie to one of the best first-person shooters of the early 2000s, but one that barely gets its dues today. Which feels especially bleak considering 2025 also saw the shuttering of its developers at Monolith Productions, a studio as important to the DNA of the modern FPS as id Software, Valve, or Bungie. If there's one game that best shows what Monolith did better than almost anyone else, it's Fear. A kinetic collision of Hong Kong action cinema and Japanese horror, it's still one of the best feeling close quarters shooters ever made. It takes Max Payne's bullet time, Halo's playful enemy AI, and a hefty dose of Duke Nukem's attitude, then drops it all into a tower action scenario that rivals Die Hard. Every floor introduces something new, be it mechanical twists, escalating challenge, and horror that keeps shifting shape. It's one of those games you really have to feel to understand. The appeal isn't so much the plot or even the presentation, as it is the physicality at play, the rhythm, the feedback, that moment-to-moment gunplay between you and the artificially intelligent actors. Unfortunately, it's also a big pain to set up. It was one of the last games I managed to get running on my PC before switching platforms. The fact there's still no simple way to play Fear in 2025, unlike Quake, Half-Life or Halo, is a genuine travesty. The same goes for Monolith's other standout shooter from that year, Condemned: Criminal Origins. I revisited it for the Bullet Time podcast and was shocked not only by how well it still plays, but by how unlike anything else it feels, even now. A survival horror adjacent brawler that filters serial killer fiction through a surprisingly grounded lens. Play the two back to back, and you get a real sense of just how far ahead Monolith were, and how much we've lost without them. From @InFrameOut, what's the best video game adaptation of a film that isn't a James Bond game? Well, great question from a great YouTube channel. It's tricky because film-to-game adaptations usually fall into one or two camps. Straight retellings that recreate movie set pieces, and looser adaptations that use the film as a jumping-off point to build something richer. I'll give one strong pick for each, while also acknowledging I never got around to Terminator 2D No Fate, which feels like it should be the obvious pick here. For a straight adaptation, my answer is Peter Jackson's King Kong, the official game of the movie. It's one of those rare cases where the game is actually better than the film. The Jackson movie, as gorgeous as it looks, is a real slog to sit through, especially with how much time it spends on Skull Island. As a game, that same space becomes genuinely compelling to explore, turning all that wasted time on screen into a brilliant thing to play with. It helps that Ubisoft strips back the UI and leans fully into diegetic design, in turn creating a tense first-person survival horror that still holds up. Maybe not as historically seismic as GoldenEye 007, but still an impressively ambitious adaptation. Now as for games based on films, we got a whole suite. Honourable mentions to Spider-Man 2, which nails the fantasy of the wall crawler's daily heroics but in the tapestry of the Raimiverse, Alien Isolation, a far better Alien sequel than most of the films, Mad Max, which is still one of the best Steam Cell games you can sink a few evenings to, and Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, along with 2024's The Great Circle, that showed just how well adventure games suit the franchise. But again, I'm going with a game that's better than the films it's based on. The Chronicles of Riddick: Escape from Butcher Bay. Pitch Black is solid, but everything after, not so much. Butcher Bay, though, genuinely is excellent. A first-person stealth adventure that fully commits to the grit and menace the films only hint at. Instead of a shallow, expanded universe, it's set almost entirely in a cramped, richly detailed prison, and it's all the better for it. Butcher Bay still looks great, plays beautifully, and delivers stronger set pieces than its source material ever managed. A fantastic first outing from a burgeoning Machine Games who'd go on to greater heights with The Darkness, Wolfenstein: The New Order, and Indiana Jones. It's a shame there's no equivalent to the Criterion Collection for games to make titles like this easy to play on modern hardware, though failing that, you could always try tracking down the PS3 versions at CEX. Before we jump into the top half of each list, I want to loop back to that 150 games figure for a moment. It's one thing to present the results, but I think it's worth calling out a few patterns that emerged from actually playing all of this stuff over the past year. Take the Switch 2. Nintendo launched it back in June alongside Mario Kart World, and at £420 for the bundle, the big question is whether that investment paid off. Honestly, not really, at least not yet. The most value I've had out of it has been the expanded Virtual Console, especially the SNES titles patched with mouse controls. I've also been able to play some big AAA releases on it without much compromise, but as for the big headliners, Donkey Kong Bonanza, Metroid Prime 4 and Mario Kart World, it's been mixed. I did really enjoy open world Mario Kart, especially doing long, structured runs by chaining together races into a kind of grand road trip. Those early weeks of ticking off P-Switch challenges were great too, particularly the classic Super Mario Kart tracks embedded into the world. I do wish its big idea was better integrated though. Being able to launch races directly from the overworld a la Forza Horizon would have gone a long way. Still, compared to recent Mario Karts where I played the new tracks once and bounced, this more flexible structure worked better for me. Donkey Kong Bonanza got its own video, and I'll admit I probably liked it more than my essay let on. As for Metroid Prime 4, well, that will probably likely get its own video in 2026, but for now, I'll let Lawrence Fishburne sum up my thoughts.
It wasn't as bad as I thought it would be.
But I just got a lot of laughs just now.
And it wasn't as good as I hoped it would be.
On the wider Metroid front, 2025 was a bit of a mixed bag. I made it to Act 1 of Silksong and never quite went back. I revisited Ultros, which ended up being my least favourite game of the year by some margin, and had an equally awkward time with Laika, A True Blood, whose bike-based mechanics constantly got in the way of its tone. The real standout for me was Good Boy Galaxy, a brand new Game Boy Advance game from 2023. Its central hook is brilliant. 3 core abilities, 3 paths planet, and each path disables one ability. It's a smart way of recontextualizing familiar spaces and absolutely worth playing, especially on period-appropriate hardware. That itch did push me back towards some classics though. I replayed Metroid Prime, Zero Mission, Fusion and Dread, alongside the Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes and all of the Luigi's Mansion games back to back. I clearly have a soft spot for tight, self-contained adventure games built around keys, upgrades and clever gating, and I'm really hoping we get a great new one next year. All of this also reinforced something else: you really don't need to spend much to have a great time. 2 of my favourites this year were Trim Job and Poco, the latter of which was free to play, and you don't even need Steam. On a trip to New York, I visited Wonderville in Brooklyn, excellent hot dogs by the way, and it reminded me how much Nidhogg 2 shines in the right setting. Maybe it struggled as a remote download, but as an arcade game, drinks flowing, it absolutely rules. Finally, and only because I forgot to mention it in my games I almost missed in 2025, I want to give a shout out to Squeakross, Home Squeak Home. It's a charming nonogram game where completing puzzles literally turns into furniture for a tiny mouse house. I'm a Picross fan, and this was easily one of the better takes on the format I've played in a while. I'm also deeply annoyed I didn't get the chance to give it a Rick Ross hustling intro. Anyways, back to the list. I gave Skin Deep its own video earlier this year, and it still stuck with me all these months later. I think much of that was down to the right timing. Much like how Death Stranding landed for me when I upgraded to a top-end PC, Skin Deep arrived just as I was settling into an entirely new setup. I played it entirely on Steam Deck, occasionally streaming it through my Mac for recording, a slightly janky arrangement, but one that worked well enough that I could even take it with me on a trip to the US and keep chipping away at its short missions without issue. A portable stealth game, it turns out, suits it perfectly. What really lingers though is the design. Skin Deep is an immersive sim with a scale of an older game like Thief, shaped by its indie budget in the Doom 3 engine. But the smaller scope is genuinely a strength. Levels are compact, objectives are tight, and you're constantly encouraged to experiment. Fail fast, reload quickly, try a new idea. There's no downtime, just pure improvisation. And as such, Skin Deep is short, punchy, and incredibly replayable. The humour won't land for everyone, but it does important work. By leaning into slapstick, the game communicates its stealth systems clearly and keeps things legible, smoothing over the usual friction immersive sims often struggle with. I still adore Skin Deep, and I'm pretty sure I'll be coming back to it again in 2026. When I covered Pepper Grinder, I mentioned I was chasing a kind of spiritual sequel to an older game I'd been meaning to properly cover. In a nice reversal of me saying I've already talked about it throughout this list, this one's more of a I'll probably want to talk about this properly later situation, so I'll choose my words carefully. Still, finally finishing Drill Dozer for the first time was an absolute joy. Playing it years after release and on hardware I'm fairly sure Nintendo wouldn't love knowing about gave it a strange new context. The Mii U Mini became a real companion this year, a perfectly sized little device for both Game Boy era classics and brand new Pico 8 games. It even has built-in rumble, which is weak but very loud, roughly as subtle as an electric toothbrush, but that sensation is now completely inseparable from Drill Dozer for me. The game absolutely revels in force feedback. using it to sell the weight and physicality of its world. It's as essential to the experience as the gorgeous sprite work and the excellent soundtrack, turning the console itself into part of the toyetic fantasy. As for Jodoza itself, it puts up serious competition with Wario Land 4 for the best platformer on the system. It also completely reframed how I think about Game Freak beyond Pokemon, sending me down a rabbit hole that included Postman and even the wonderfully odd Mario and Wario. I'll stop there before I spoil a future video, but I will say this: Jodoza was one of my favourite older discoveries this year, and a solid reason for owning a good portable emulation machine to really put these classics in the right context. From @Chilling with the Capuchkins, what classic genre/game mechanics do you think could use a modern twist/subversion? How would you go about incorporating them into a game? That's another really great question. A mechanic I'd love to see make a comeback is the timer, especially in action-adventure games and platformers. Sports, fighting, and racing games still rely on them, but they've basically vanished from big, modern platformers. As such, I'd really love to see them like the next open-world 3D Mario or even Astro Bot really commit to one again. I get why timers fell out of favour, they stress people out, and players don't like feeling forced to do everything perfectly in one perfect run. That's why Tony Hawk eventually moved away from that structure, but I think there's an untapped way to use them. Imagine Super Mario 64 with a Wario Land 4 twist. Initially, you get to explore a dense level freely, learn the layouts, and find objectives without pressure, but when you're ready to lock things in, you trigger a timer. Suddenly it's about optimization, routing, movement, decision making. How much can you pull off before the buzzer hits? You could even layer in competition too, head-to-head races, bingo-style objectives, even random modifiers. We've seen hints of this in games like Crash Team Rumble and the Bizarre mod for Mario 64, but I'd love to see it fully integrated with classic goals. Bosses, red coins, secret stars. A timer-driven game about competitive exploration, whether solo or against other players, would really push the want to replay great 3D levels and keep refining your runs. If 2013 was the year of Luigi, then 2025 might go down as the year of the mouse, thanks largely to morsels and maze mice. Small games with equally small heroes, and yet ones I probably spent the most time with all year, which feels fitting. They're very much cut from the same cloth, two pups from the same dough if you like. Yes, I did look that up. Most of the 150 games I played this year were for the channel, things I'd finish, review, and move on from. Even with longer stay titles like Imperious DX, Pepper Grinder, Ball Pit, and Absalom, I eventually hit a natural stopping point and never really came back. That wasn't the case with Morsels nor Maze Mice, as both quietly became my go-to background games. Maze Mice has a slight edge purely on convenience. It runs natively on Mac and plays great with just a keyboard, while Morsels became my end of session ritual after streaming from the Steam Deck. But the reason they stuck around longer than most really comes down to their design DNA. Morsels, which I talked about at length in Games I Almost Missed in 2025, takes a relaxed approach to roguelike conventions. From its characters to its pacing, it's just a pleasant world to spend time in. It feels fantastic to play, looks and sounds unlike anything else, and even now I'm still discovering new wrinkles after multiple successful runs. It might be a harder sell if you're deep into Isaac or Nuclear Throne, but for me, it was the first game of its kind that really clicked, and it's still sticking with me into 2026. Maze Mice pushes things even further. It takes the Vampire Survivors formula and smartly filters it through Pac-Man Championship Edition, lining up enemies and XP into elegant conga lines you're constantly weaving through. Like Vampire Survivors, it has that almost bottomless sense of progression, with upgrades that tweak stats, thin out enemies, or throw in wild modifiers. There aren't many surprises beyond what that demo already showed, but that's kind of the point. It's confident enough to be generous and still feel more than worth its modest asking price. Like Morsels, it also has an excellent soundtrack, this time drawing heavily from 90s house and New Jack Swing. Both have become perfect wind-down games for calls, renders, or decompressing after something more intense. That arcade analogy crops up again. They're not the flashiest game of the year, but they're exceptional in-between games. Not full meals, but really good morsels you can keep coming back to. And the fact that both manage this with such small scopes is a real credit to the developers behind them. From @theodor1080, what was the weirdest game from last year you liked? I like to think I'm pretty open-minded, but I suppose I do have a limit on what I can stomach. That said, one game I'm genuinely glad I took a chance on was Egg Squeeze, a gift from friend, game designer, and genuine game freak Chariot Rider. The entire game is exactly what it sounds like. You squeeze an egg and then release it before it cracks. The tighter you can ride that threshold, the higher your ESP rank climbs. All of this takes place in a black void that slowly fills with erratic UI clutter, while you're periodically interrupted by phone calls from an unseen egg CEO, urging you to push things further. It might be too odd for some people, but I loved it. It's one of those games that strips everything back to the bare minimum. Mechanics, visuals, sound, and still manages to be completely absorbing. From @transparency.bsky.social, what was the hot cider avatar creature of 2025? This might be the hardest question yet, because 2025 was a really good year for little gremlin guys. I think Void Kong from Donkey Kong Bonanza is genuinely hard to beat as one of the strongest new character designs in the Nintendo canon. Where Donkey Kong is big and round and radiates kindness, VK is small, sharp-edged, and vaguely unpleasant. He's the perfect visual and tonal counterpoint, and in classic Wario-adjacent fashion, he also has this strange charisma. You just want to see more of him. I can already picture him coming back in spin-off games, using that banana remote to create platforms, solve puzzles, and genuinely be a little menace in increasingly inventive ways. The sooner he can appear in Mario Kart World, the better. While many of my highlights this year were tightly engineered puzzle platforms or roguelikes, Skin Deep was a good reminder that I also love games that give you the freedom to throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. Its 2D counterpart, which I only got around to this year thanks to the upcoming Frog Spin, was Mosalina. It's very much a game designer's game. Most of the praise I've seen has come from developers or people who make videos about game design, while plenty of others have bounced off it, usually because of its loosely explained, semi-randomized powers. And honestly, if Mosalina were a bigger and more demanding game, I'd probably feel the same way. But its strength is in how lightly it treats itself. There are no long tutorials, no grand story beats, no lives to manage or timers to fight. It's just you, a simple goal, and a handful of malfunctioning abilities to experiment with. Levels cycle quickly, whether you succeed or fall to your doom, and that immediacy makes failure feel informative rather than punishing. You still have to make something work with the tools you're given though. Success feels earned, just without the sting of being forced to sit with failure for too long. I really appreciated that balance. It also received a 2025 update with even more toys to play with, and I'd love to see Stuff Wombat return to the idea again in future. Honestly, I'd even be curious to see someone attempt a 3D take on Mosalina, however strange that might end up looking. From @brianhenkin.bsky.social, in what ways do you feel like gaming has regressed, and in what ways has it progressed? Just from your perspective, being in the sphere that you are, what's got you hyped and what's got you worried? And also from @bestYouTuber69.bsky.social, also known as Gim, best low stakes drama of the year that you got way too invested in. I'll combine these questions together as they overlap quite nicely. On the one hand, I genuinely think games get better every year. More people than ever are making interesting work at every scale, from solo developers and small teams to the occasional big budget game that really lands. On the other, I think the industry itself keeps getting worse. Like most tech spaces, costs keep rising in the pursuit of profit, and that pushes publishers towards risk management over creativity. Safer bets, less room to fail. Instead of accepting smaller margins to support creatives, big companies are cutting staff across the board, shutting down prestigious studios, and chasing trends like generative AI as a people replacement tool, despite plenty of evidence that it leads to worse outcomes. Games could be even better, but the biggest thing holding them back is the people funding them. A bit closer to home, the same tension exists in games writing. The work itself is more diverse and thoughtful than ever, but the platforms supporting it are worse. Talented journalists and critics are losing jobs as outlets slash coverage or shut down entirely. What remains is increasingly optimized for clicks, often favouring low-effort outrage, whether human-made or AI-generated. Talking about games as a cultural medium has become genuinely exhausting in places, with so much oxygen taken up by culture war nonsense. What stuck with me most in 2025 wasn't a single drama, but how consistently some voices tried to turn games into yet another political battleground. Watching figures like Asmongold gain outside influence over the conversation can make you want to disengage entirely, but that's kind of the trap. These voices grow precisely because they're signal boosted by the opposition, feeding an antagonistic loop where outrage sustains relevance. So for my own sanity, I've mostly tried to stay out of it. What's saddest is that YouTube increasingly feels like the last viable home for games writing at all, and it's a platform that has always been shaped by whatever drives views, which is usually controversial. Meanwhile, writers whose work I followed and admired for years are now the ones asking me for support. A guy with a subscription count barely larger than the population of St. Martin. It genuinely sucks. There's incredible creative work happening across games and criticism, but far less support reaching the people who actually deserve it. Alright, let's try and lighten the mood a little bit. I don't think enough praise gets heaped onto Capcom's Ace Attorney games. When you're the publisher behind all-timers like Street Fighter, Resident Evil, Monster Hunter, and of course Zack and Wiki, the quest for Barbaros's treasure, it's easy for a few gems to get lost in the glare of diamonds. But I genuinely think Ace Attorney's low-fidelity courtroom adventures are amongst the best things Capcom has ever made. They're the fullest realization of the Nintendo DS as a crossover console. Despite the original trilogy starting life on the GBA, these aren't reaction speed games, they're big, playable books that test intuition and logic. As series creator Shu Takumi put it in a 2018 GDC talk, Ace Attorney sits between suspense and mystery, the former pulling you forward with drama, and the latter forcing you to stop and think. That balance is the secret sauce, as is its excellent writing, which gets translated almost near perfectly to English. In a strange way, they even feel like another branch of the Resident Evil family tree. While games like Dino Crisis, Onimusha and Devil May Cry share more obvious mechanical DNA, Ace Attorney carries that same investigative spirit, inspecting items in 3D, building your cases and reworking boss battles into witness cross-examinations shows how far you can transform an idea while still keeping its core intact. I really love them. Having played the original trilogy in its HD collection years ago, I finally got around to the Investigations games this year, helped along by Humble offering their lowest price yet. So what are they? Instead of playing as Phoenix Wright, you step into the shoes of his rival prosecutor Miles Edgeworth. On the surface, the gameplay is simple. You chat to characters, spot contradictions, and follow the correct lines of reasoning. But beneath that clean interface is some genuinely smart puzzle design. It's a great example of games built for a broader audience, easy to pick up but deeply satisfying to work through. In Investigations, the courtroom drama is mostly set aside in favour of expanded investigation segments, the hidden object style exploration that usually only appeared in brief interludes. That shift brings in a host of new ideas. The prosecutor is a logic fiend, and the game literalizes that by letting you link disparate pieces of information to unlock new paths forward. In the second game, cross-examinations evolve into full-on argument battles, where you wear opponents down before landing a verbal suplex. It sounds silly, and it is, but Ace Attorney thrives in that heightened, melodramatic space, complete with triumphant musical stings wherever you land a decisive blow. What really pushes it so high on my list compared to everything else I played in 2025 is the sheer quality of its content. The upscaled visuals look fantastic on Steam Deck, striking a perfect balance between something you could sit and watch on TV and a portable story you can also dip in and out of. More importantly, it features some of the best written cases in the series' history, to the point where it's not just good writing for a game, but just genuinely good writing. Penning a compelling mystery is hard enough, and making one playable is even harder, yet the team at Capcom make it feel effortless. The characterization of both the leads and the criminals you cross-examine is a reminder of just how strong Capcom's character design has always been, on the page as much as on the screen. I've still got more Ace Attorney collections to work through, including the later era entries rebuilt in Capcom's RE engine. And what that really makes me hope for is a proper return to the series, not an open world reinvention, because they're at their best under tight control. Where other games aim for JRPG, Ace Attorney is proudly JPEG, and I wouldn't have it any other way. From @RedMeerkat1, how long does it take to make a video or an episode of Bullet Time from concept to publishing? I don't want to give a how long is a piece of string answer, so I'll give some examples from recent uploads. My next fest looks take about 4 days total, though I guess to be more accurate 4 evenings during the working week. That usually means an evening playing demos, recording everything as I go, and jotting down quick notes. The following days are spent refining those notes into a script, recording the voiceover, and assembling everything in Premiere. Having a library of reusable elements has made that turnaround much faster each time I've done it. At the other end of the scale, something like the Keeley data video took closer to a month, but it was built on years of background work. The idea grew out of an ongoing conversation and data I had already been collecting, which led to a few days of focused research, script writing, graphics, and then a couple of intense evenings of editing to hit the Halloween release. Most essay-style videos sit somewhere in between, a week of developing the idea, then another week of capture, voiceover and editing. Smaller videos can be much faster. The 3 I released back-to-back in October were done in just a few hours. Bullet time can be a bit quicker, but its biggest issue is scheduling guests and the time that they may need to prepare. This isn't a definitive workflow and it's definitely not a flex, it's just what works for me. I like working fast. The sooner it's finished, the sooner I can watch it. On that note, from @JesseGarasha, if you were free to do YouTube full-time, what sort of stuff would you want to do more of? This is a great question, especially given how the channel's grown. I think the easiest way to answer it is by starting with what I can't do right now, since YouTube isn't my full-time job. The main constraint is time. Ongoing projects like Bullet Time or Quest and Show tend to be seasonal, and the more ambitious video ideas, like those that would require heavy R&D, learning new software or bringing in outside expertise, usually have to be simplified or set aside in favour of what's realistically doable. The Keeley data video is a good example. The original concept was far more ambitious, requiring me to learn Blender to create its intended look, but instead I reshaped it around the materials and tools I already had. I'm happy with how it turned out, and it's been genuinely encouraging to see others build on that work, but those kinds of creative compromises are a constant. Because of that, I've constantly shifted towards quicker, mixtape style videos over the years. They're not just more sustainable, they also line up neatly with how I actually engage with games right now. Casting a wide net, then enthusiastically sharing the best of what I find. I'd expect if YouTube ever became a steady income, it'd probably be because of what I'm doing right now, and audiences would likely want more of it. Going full-time would mean more consistency then, and possibly turning Hot Cider into something closer to a platform than just a channel. With more breathing room, I'd want to be more ambitious, like making cool games feel more magazine-like, with a diversity of voices involved, be it games writers, editors, or video artists. Using whatever clout I have to support other people's work is really appealing. I also consume a lot of games criticism, and the idea of bringing that difference of perspectives into the channel is a genuine dream. It might not be the smartest YouTube move algorithmically, but creatively it's incredibly exciting. I'd also like to expand into more live coverage, events, developer interviews, and the wider world of games beyond what's new on Steam. I'm already partway there, having attended PAX East and built a relationship with developers this past year. The challenge is an interest in pursuing these leads, but sustainability. If YouTube did become viable full-time, I think there's also a case for specialization. There's very little dedicated coverage of games on Mac, and SteamOS coverage is only going to grow as Valve releases new hardware. I'd love to give those audiences a clear on-ramp into discovering what these platforms offer, and then guide them towards the broader realm of games, writing, and criticism that my peers excel at. That kind of sustainability would also open the door to revisiting Bullet Time and Quest and Show with more structure, possibly even outside producers, and to experimenting with more specialized projects, longer form documentaries, animated pieces, and a backlog of unrealized ideas that are just waiting for a safer position to start from. For now though, the channel and the Patreon turn a very small profit and are supported by my full-time job. What I've achieved so far is turning a hobby into a consistent creative outlet, and I'm genuinely grateful to the friends and viewers who have supported it for nearly 9 years. If I ever went full-time, it would probably mean doing more of that, more consistently, with a bit more space to experiment, giving others a platform to shine, and try some weirder ideas along the way. Oh boy. Before I get to my favourite new release of 2025, and my favourite first time play, I need to address my darkest moment of the past 12 months. A nearly 8-week stretch where I became terribly addicted to the Czech Republic's most dangerous export, Factorio. I've long said that Minecraft sits at the top of my all-time favourites list, largely because of how effortlessly creative it is. It takes what looks like a simple box of digital Lego and quietly unfolds into an astonishing playground of systems. You can build computers out of redstone and logic gates, vast factories with waterways and hoppers to automate, or entire worlds recreated block by block. Or if you're like me, you can live a quieter life, build a small wooden house, spend afternoons mining, and hoarding resources with no end goal beyond accumulation. What I fully didn't appreciate until Factorio is just how powerful that last loop can be. Factorio's danger lies in how elegantly it teaches you to simplify and automate. Every problem presents a solution that removes friction, saves time, and scales infinitely, even when the thing you're optimizing doesn't actually make your life better. In fact, if you play on higher difficulties, which I very much did not, you're actively making things worse, increasing pollution, antagonizing the local wildlife, and strip mining an entire planet in the name of efficiency. Yes, there's a nominal end goal, build a rocket and escape, but the real objective is purity of automation. Eliminate bottlenecks, expand throughput, consume more space, extract more resources, build a machine that runs flawlessly, forever. That hook dug in deep enough that I eventually had to hide the game in my Steam library just to stop myself booting it up for 5 more minutes. You'd think switching to Mac would have saved me, but no, full Apple Silicon support. So, nice for that, Whoop. Still, even half-jokingly, it's hard to really punish Factorio for being exceptionally good at what it does. In the same way I can't fault Vampire Survivors for its addictive loop, or Peak for turning shared frustration into fun. I'm annoyed that I got addicted to Factorio, and somehow even more annoyed that I now have to applaud it for being so well designed that it made that addiction possible. It's a dream PC game. Visuals and tone that feel straight out of the early 90s, paired with a modern interface packed with decades of quality of life thinking. It looks simple enough for a child to play, but I absolutely wouldn't recommend giving it to one, unless you're comfortable with a slight chance they grow up to be a nuclear engineer or, more likely, a lifelong PC addict. Even writing this, I can feel the itch creeping back in, the temptation to revisit those opening hours, laying out conveyor belts and robotic arms, turning raw copper into sheets, sheets into coils, coils into circuits, and circuits into even more infrastructure, planning, expanding, optimizing, imagining a planet-sized factory mapped perfectly to its resources. There really is no other game that does what Factorio does, for better or worse, and at the risk of sending you down a very dark path, I do think it's something everyone should experience at least once. From @Zachary237.bsky.social, was there anything new or interesting in 2025 that you'd like to see become a positive trend in future? Beyond the surge in games worker unionization and long overdue pushback against publishers, the biggest positive shift this year has been the growing dominance of independent games. Not just in general conversation, but even Game of the Year discussions. That feels genuinely healthy for the medium, and it's encouraging to see some of that power moving slowly from the old guard and more towards a diverse and democratic space. A lot of that comes down to better tools. Engines like Godot continue to improve, lowering the barrier to entry and letting more developers ship ambitious work without massive backing. The same is true for creative software more broadly. Tools like DaVinci Resolve and Canva are now genuinely viable alternatives to Adobe, which makes a real difference to the indie scale. It's also been reassuring to see strong resistance to generative AI in games, at least in its current form. The definitions are still fuzzy, but the pushback itself matters. While there were a few emerging genres I didn't entirely gel with, I really liked how experimental indies have been right out of the gate. We did see straight up Lethal Company riffs like Repo, but Peak showed what happens when that tech is pushed into a completely different kind of game. Likewise, seeing Vampire Survivors style mechanics pop up in Pac-Man or Arkanoid inspired designs was genuinely exciting, and Absalom using Hades-like systems gave that genre a solid entry point for the average player. And while I've been pretty gloomy about the growing influence of right-wing voices in games discourse, that's also been met with meaningful pushback. There's been strong support for outlets like Aftermath, which are helping give games writers a platform at a time where many traditional spaces have disappeared. They can be insular, sure, but discoverability is improving across platforms, and more people are finding writers who specialise deeply in a specific niche. Thinky Games and RPG site are great examples, even if I don't really read them myself. In some ways it feels a bit like the old internet again. The giants have crumbled and we're left with lots of smaller but passionate spaces. Honestly, I'd be pretty happy for all of these to become positive trends going forward. In what might be the most anticlimactic final since Stranger Things, I couldn't actually pick a single number one. So instead, my top 2 new releases of 2025 are sharing the gold trophy. It feels fitting, the lead designer of one worked on the other, and both clearly draw from the design lineage of Electhead as exceptional puzzle platformers, the kind I'd be genuinely surprised to see outclassed anytime soon. They're right at the cutting edge of the format. Games that stand shoulder to shoulder with Portal and in some ways even rival it, despite missing that extra third dimension. And yes, slightly deflating again, they both already got their own videos this year, but that's fine because I'm about to explain all over again why they're my favourite new releases of 2025, even stacked up against things like Silksong, Hades 2 or Donkey Kong Bonanza. It's hard to overstate just how expertly made OO and Motion Rec are. OO is a masterclass in minimalism. You play as a caterpillar made out of bomb segments, starting with just one and only ever gaining a second. From that tiny toolkit, the game brings out an astonishing range of possibilities: leaps, pseudo-dashes, and environmental manipulation. It constantly encourages playful misuse, letting you feel like you're breaking the game, when in reality, everything has been meticulously designed around that sense of mischief. There's no lore, no text, no tutorials, just pure discovery. Progression feels almost Metroid-like, not because you unlock new abilities, but because each new insight suddenly blows open fresh ways forward. And impressively, it sustains that level of ingenuity across its short but very sweet runtime. Motion Reg might be even more ambitious. Its single mechanic, recording and replaying your own movements anywhere, essentially lets you invent your own abilities. Ride an elevator up, then replay that motion to lift yourself through mid-air. Walk across safe ground, then reuse it to cross spikes or gaps. Instead of unlocking a double jump or air dash, you build one. It gets demanding, sometimes opaque, but that escalation only highlights just how flexible and deep the system really is. Unlike older time-bending games that revel in cleverness, Motion Rec stays focused on empowering the player to solve its problems. Both games share a clean and restrained audio-visual style that builds directly on what Elechead did so well. Honestly, I'd love to see all three preserved as a single collection in physical form because they really do deserve to stick around. That's why they remind me most of Valve's Portal. Compact and confident games that don't overstay their welcome, don't rely on cheap spectacle, and instead wow you with a full exploration of every clever use of their core ideas. They're also refreshingly non-violent. Except for the end of OO, I suppose. What's really left to say about Disco Elysium? It's a work so widely admired that it's left fingerprints on almost everyone who cares deeply about games. In just a few short years, it's been dissected, reinterpreted, and practically exhumed. There are entire YouTube channels devoted to it, podcasts and reading groups. It's inspired an arms race to create its true successor, an almost foolish ambition that only reinforces how singular it really is. So I guess the better question is, why did it take me until 2025 to fully play it? Disco Elysium has become such a revered object in my circles that for years, it felt completely impenetrable. So many writers, artists, and friends I respected spoke about it with something close to religious awe. I knew it was good, but I was worried about the opposite problem. What if I didn't like it as much as everybody else? That's not an abstract fear for me. I've bounced off plenty of beloved games, Hollow Knight, Outer Wilds, Dark Souls, despite multiple attempts, walkthroughs, and even workshops designed to help me get it. I figured Disco Elysium would be the same, and honestly, history seemed to support that fear. I tried to play it several times before, and every time I fizzled out before I'd even properly stepped out of the whirling in rags. What finally changed was playing it with other people. A few friends had also never made it through, and we had the bright idea to turn it into a Disco Elysium book club, and it turns out that a struggle shared feels much less like a failure. Maybe that's the reason my friend slot works so well. All those early anxieties, did I pick the wrong stats, am I talking to the wrong people, am I playing it correctly, just melted away when I realised everyone else was feeling the exact same thing. What I had built up in my head as an impenetrable art object turned out to just have a slightly mean opening. In hindsight, not nearly as daunting as it felt at the time. So if there's one thing I'd want to say to anyone still on the fence about Disco Elysium, worry that they won't get it, or that they'll bounce off and feel stupid for doing so, is this: just stick with it. You're not doing anything wrong. Disco Elysium is an RPG in the truest sense. You are meant to fail roles, you are meant to fumble conversations, but failure isn't a dead end here. It's a complication, another wrinkle in your version of the story. And it's a story worth sinking into, one where history and reality are open to interpretation. There is a definitive ending that everybody reaches, but how you feel about it is shaped entirely by the choices you make along the way. What surprised me most, and something that I don't think any bit of criticism really prepared me for, is just how funny Disco Elysium is. Not just sharp, observational humour about your washed-up detective and the world he inhabits, but genuinely goofy, sometimes ridiculous comedy that fits RPGs perfectly. It's not laugh out loud constantly, but if you're worried it's a bleak, joyless, Soviet-inspired slog, well, thankfully it absolutely isn't. It's also a compelling mystery that, like many great detective stories, ends up being the least interesting part of the game. What really pulls you in is the world, its history, its people, its politics. You don't have to engage with all of it, but the writing makes you want to. It's homework that somehow doesn't feel like homework. In a medium obsessed with combat systems and genre obligations, Disco Elysium is strikingly pure. It's brutal, political, and emotionally violent at times, and yet you never have to fire a gun. There are no forced action sequences, no vestigial minigames, no over-the-shoulder camera, because that's what games are supposed to have. It's just you, the characters, and the writing. Disco Elysium really is an extraordinary work, but what I was most grateful to discover is that it isn't an exclusive one. You don't need a degree in politics or history to appreciate it. You just need a little bit of patience, and maybe just a few people to struggle through it with. But once it clicks, it really, really clicks. From @katieandcatburger.bsky.social, what are your hot-sided predictions for trends in gaming for 2026? I think we'll see even more experimentation in the friend slop space, alongside developers jamming Blatcher and Vampire Survivor style systems into genres that still feel oddly untouched. Sports, fighting, and racing games in particular. In fact, doing this video again, a co-op frustration game about driving actually got announced, so there we go. Breakout games seem to be skewing younger and more universal in their appeal, at least judging by recent Keighley trends. I think that's good because it gets people to look at mechanics beyond just shooting guns, though I hope it doesn't slide into the same problem cozy games have where all the edge gets sanded off. On the industry side, I think studios will quietly stop talking about generative AI while using it more under the hood, which makes scrutiny even more important. Hardware-wise, Valve's next moves with the Steam Machine and Steam Frame could open another accessible on-ramp into PC games, much like the Deck did, if the pricing's right. I'm less convinced the Switch 2's mouse mode will be the breakout control innovation Gyro was, though I'd love to be wrong. I also think the gap between the two console giants will widen, Sony leading further into boutique hardware and first-party games, and Microsoft into a software-first ecosystem. Personally, I'd love to see some real competition emerge there, even on the PC side to challenge some of Valve's supremacy. Finally, we might start to see 360-era nostalgia pay off in a more concrete way. We're already seeing smaller studios revisit cover shooters, and I wouldn't be surprised if bigger publishers follow suit. Tomb Raider Legacy of Atlantis and 007 First Light feel like a good litmus test. Do people actually want to return to that era of AAA design, or something genuinely new? Those are probably my most anticipated games for next year, though I'm also really looking forward to Resident Evil 9, especially after how strong the RE4 remake was. I'm keen on Ontos from the Soma developers, Tankrat from Kepler, and honestly, even the new LEGO Batman. I've missed the Arkham series, and this feels like a fun way back into that world with the lighter touch the LEGO games do so well. That and all the games in 2025 I missed that might become first-time plays in 2026. But for now, I think that's about it for this video. This was a bit different, but I hope you enjoyed this more lower stakes wander through last year. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts, whether it's games you love that I should check out, or questions about the channel I just didn't get to. Otherwise, as usual, I've been James, and I'll see you all, hopefully, in the next upload.